Bama, Ohio State just wrapping up. Going to do a breakdown, a quick reaction for all the NFL draft prospects in the game. As far as the game goes, I mean, obviously it was really entertaining. Goddamn, Alabama. Uh, Not a lot to say though. Obviously, not a very close game or anything like that. So I just want to look at it from because that's what I do, this NFL stuff. So I want to look at it from that perspective. I'm going to start with Bama. So first thing, listen, Devonta Smith. All right. So people talk about in this draft, right? They talk about Trevor Lawrence and Penei Sewell as being like generational prospects, which probably is the case as far as process go. Devonta Smith is every bit in that category as those guys are. I couldn't care less about his size really. It obviously, if that was going to stop him, it already would have. And there's a lot of examples actually of not that small. Don't get me wrong, he's really small, but of smaller receivers begin the NFL. In fact, I would argue that generally all of the best receivers are smaller guys, outside of like very very rare exceptions, being like Calvin Johnson and Julio Jones being the main two. The vast majority of receivers that are actually good in the NFL and actually lead to wins are smaller guys. I'm talking Stephon Diggs, Antonio Brown, Robert Woods, those types of receivers, and Devonta Smith. I mean, yeah, Antonio Brown. I see it there now. I'm gonna be careful with it, but when people talk about potential, especially at the receiver position, I actually think it's not about if a guy's like 6'4" and can run 4.240 like DK Metcalf, right? Now he's good independently, but potential is a lot more in ceiling, this like mythic thing that people talk about. It actually I think is defined by if a player like is already this good, and then if their physical limitations don't actually matter at the next level. Because then all of a sudden you go from like all these concerns with a player to none, and that's Devonta Smith. If that size thing is not a problem at the NFL level, which I can't imagine it will be, that guy's a Hall of Famer. I mean, it just is what it is. So yeah, Devonta Smith is generational, is the tied for second best prospect in this draft, no question. And we'll see if he goes that high, being a receiver. But anyone past Trevor Lawrence at one is probably making a mistake by not drafting him. Then Najee Harris too. That guy actually might matter at running back. So I'm definitely in the camp of like running backs don't matter, right? Or I used to be a lot stronger about it, but I kind of realized, especially since I got more into watching everything and keeping track of what actually matters. I don't feel necessarily that strongly about that anymore. I think there's definitely examples of running backs that, and the main thing is that turn drives into touchdowns. I mentioned that a lot in my like game breakdowns. That is what matters for running back, is if they can turn a drive, a play into a touchdown. Not that many can. Dalvin Cook is probably the best example of that, but like Aaron Jones, Christian McCaffrey, those guys, they really matter. And Najee Harris would actually, like, if a team were to pick him in the second round, he actually has a chance to be worth it. Now, you got to be careful because that's one of those things you just don't know until they actually play an NFL game. But, I mean, every sign would definitely point to it. Now, still not worth a first-round pick, very likely, but because the contract that comes attached with it. But, yeah, as a second-rounder, even as a running back, I think he's very likely worth the shot, depending on, obviously, depending on the team, too. Mac Jones. He didn't do fucking anything wrong, right? So he had the one fumble at the beginning of the game, which looked bad, and was bad. But is that something like that I even really give a fuck about? No, it's his first fumble loss of his whole career, and was it a stupid thing to happen? Yeah, but like I said, does that show any long term concern? No. The question with him though, because yeah, like I said, he didn't do anything wrong, but. I mean, and I'm sure if you pay attention to this stuff, you've heard this take 1,000 times before, but it's relevant in this case. Is with that supporting cast and in that scenario, if he's any good, it's really hard not to succeed. Now, to that extent, that's not necessarily the case. I mean, we saw him do better than even just Tua did last year, and Tua sucks in the NFL, right? So. We'll see. But my question would be with him is just, is what he did, does that look any different than like if you were to switch him with, Kyle Trask or something like that? Maybe. Really hard to know that. I would guess probably not. But hey, playing with a lot of NFL players, lots of success. And in the NFL, he's only playing with NFL players, right? So I definitely think he's another one where he's actually more of a risky, because people are going to talk about him as like a game manager safe pick, and I just completely disagree. Because what's going to happen with him is if he gets the NFL, it's either his brain still works, right? In which case, in a good offense, he's going to be really good, or his athletic limitations are so bad that he can't even get in the game. And there's not really in between outside of like really shitty game manager, but or game man. That's not, that term is useless. Outside of like really shitty backup, right? But that's effectively not in a game. You know that's the lower end, and you would know that really quickly. And I think that's what's valuable in drafting a quarterback is if you know they're going to be good really quick or not. And he definitely has a chance to. Jalen Waddle, yeah, he obviously wasn't very impactful in this game. Don't really care coming off that crazy injury, coming back that quick. He's still, based from everything I've seen, pretty clearly a first-round super value receiver. I can't imagine he's not better than Henry Ruggs. And, I mean, he was when they played at the same time, right? So, should be a first-round pick. Long-term, him coming back this early means that injury is probably not a concern. Not super sure about that, but yeah, I'm not worried about that with Jalen Waddle, obviously. The Alabama O-line, man, they were crazy good in this game, as they are in pretty much every game. Now, one thing I want to point out with that, and there's something with Mac Jones too, is that Ohio State was down a bunch of starting / important defensive players, defensive linemen specifically. So I don't want to necessarily go crazy with how like dominant the Alabama line was and assume that that's what's going to happen in the NFL, because we've already seen like Jonah Williams was dominant at Alabama, and he's been awful since he's played for the Bengals. So I don't want to throw into too much into it, but I mean, between Landon Dickerson, Alex Leatherwood, and I think it's Deontay Brown or Deion Brown, that guard, there's going to be a multiple probably long-term NFL starters in there. So yeah, defensively, Dylan Moses, boo boy. He sucks. That's harsh. I don't think he's going to be a valuable NFL linebacker. I mean, he hasn't shown any reason to expect him to be. So that's as much as I want to say about that. I didn't, watch him super closely either, though, so I don't want to like make a strong take based on not that much. Patrick Surtain. So he didn't look great in this game, but he didn't look bad at all. Now, it's really hard with corners without watching like full films to like decide if they played well or not. It's pretty much impossible just because of the camera angles they use in broadcasts. But he didn't do anything worrying, which is a plus. But I do question, because it's not like he manned up and shut down Chris Olave. And Chris Olave is really good, but without the ability to like meaningfully impact a receiver, it's one of those things with why take a corner in the top, whatever 20 if they're not going to do that for you, because unless you have one of those corners, they're just not that valuable. Someone like Byron Jones would be an example of that. He's not worth his contract. He's like better than most corners in the NFL, but he doesn't actually limit any good receivers when he's playing against them, which just really limits how useful he is, and that's something I would maybe worry about with Surtain. But again, that's hard to know without watching a lot more. Christian Barmore, so he made a ton of flash plays. The broadcast talked about him incessantly in the second half, which I'm not gonna blame him for. I mean, again, he did make a lot of plays, but at the end of the first half, and I think maybe the beginning of the second, Ohio State lost 2 starting offensive linemen, and it was kind of after that point where he really went off. Now that's not. Ohio State has a ton of 5 stars, has a ton of really good linemen, and, they still had 3 starters or whatever, so I'm not going to write him off, but I do just want to mention that he was going against some backups, and what he did, making plays behind the line of scrimmage in the run game, is super valuable, but none of them looked like, were like wow plays, so we'll see. I think he has a chance because those penetrating defensive tackles are worth a lot to be useful. But again, I don't want to like freak out about him, because this game when he's playing against backups, with a big lead, and what he did wasn't actually all that crazy impressive, especially in the like pass rushing. So then Ohio State offensively. So yeah, I'll start with Justin Fields. Not worried about him. I actually almost come away from that game more sure that Justin Fields is going to be something in the NFL. Grade I'm going to hold off on, but he reminds me a ton of Deshaun Watson. Now, that's not the compliment for me that it is for a lot of other people, because I hear people talk about Deshaun Watson as like a top whatever fucking 5 quarterback in the NFL, which is bonkers. He's not even close, but I shouldn't say that. There's not that many good quarterbacks in the NFL. He's probably like top 10, but he's nowhere near the actual top 5. But he's obviously successful and is better than a whole lot of other quarterbacks in the NFL, and a ton of the things that Justin Fields is willing to do are things that Deshaun Watson can do, and the problems that Justin Fields has are problems that Deshaun Watson has still. So even if he doesn't get better at those things, it doesn't actually preclude him from being successful in the NFL. Specifically, yeah, that pertains to actually going fully through progressions, and Justin Fields can still skip like open receivers sometimes. But again, Deshaun Watson does that all the time, and frankly, so do players. I mean, Russell Wilson does that a lot too, and he's still obviously really, really good. It's just because they make up for it in other areas, and Justin Fields showed that he might be able to, not just with his legs, but with his willingness and ability to throw the ball down the field accurately, and just frequently just doing it. The act of throwing the ball deep is just such a positive expected value thing that he showed that I think is pretty clearly worth a really, really high pick. And that's why I want to go back to how I said, there's the 3 generational guys, which I don't love that term, but just, like top tier between Smith, presumably Penei Sewell. He's sat out this year. I don't actually know, and then Trevor Lawrence. Justin Fields is I think right behind that for sure. Otherwise, on the Ohio State offense, Chris Olave. Actually, that was so. I talked about how Patrick Surtain wasn't that great on him. He was pretty good though, and if anything, that makes me more worried about Olave as like a superstar NFL receiver, which super high bar, obviously. And I think he has a real good shot to be real good, but I do worry about his actual ceiling is like, I'm not even going to say number 1 receiver. That's a fucking stupid concept. As a like a super meaningful, consistent receiver in the NFL, like if you replaced him with like college Terry McLaurin in this game, I think it would look a lot different. On the Ohio State O-line, they got some draft eligible guys, specifically not Wyatt Teller, it's the Browns guy, Wyatt Davis. He got hurt, like I said, it was either right at the end of the second quarter or right at the beginning of the third. Before he got hurt though, he was fine. The Alabama defensive line was not killing Ohio State really. Ohio State as an offense just wasn't all that bad, and they just had real trouble keeping up with these 15 play dominant drives from the Bama offense, which whatever, that's not a super indictment on them. But there was nothing, despite what happened in the second half, like super concerning about. But again, specifically, it's more about Wyatt Davis. Defensively, real quick, Ohio State was missing Trey Sermon too, and it kind of showed that it doesn't fucking matter. So I talked about how I thought Trey Sermon in the last, the reaction I did to the Clemson game, that I thought that Trey Sermon might have a chance to, I don't know, be a second string power back in the NFL, which is still true. I mean, just because he's out, it doesn't change anything. But I think you kind of saw that the difference between insert 100 college running backs, including Master Teague, just isn't there enough to be worth any real NFL draft capital. Defensively for Ohio State, again, they were missing a lot of their relevant defensive linemen, so that kind of changes everything. But the main one, really the only one I care about for this, and the last one for the video, is Shaun Wade. People hyped the shit out of him going into the year, and he didn't even come close to living up to it. And you can give the excuses that he's playing against, these crazy good receivers. The problem is, of course, when you're expected to be a first-round, NFL corner, that's what you're going to be doing all the time at the next level. And you need to at least show that you can, do it ever in college, especially as an outside guy. Now, he was, a lot better in the slot last year, and I think in the end, he does still show signs of being a useful, all-around slot, run-defending slot guy who can cover a little bit too. But that is not worth a first-round pick, at all, because the ceiling of that is, I don't know, someone maybe this isn't the best example, but Mike Hilton on the Steelers, who's really, really good, and maybe the best in that, type of role, and he is not worth a first-round pick at all. So, yeah, Shaun Wade, yikes. If you can't meaningfully limit any NFL receiver talent, then you don't belong in the first round as a corner. So yeah, those are my quick thoughts on all the prospects. The main thing though is Devonta Smith. That guy is a Hall of Famer. I'm telling you.